Welcome back to the 3 months of Modal Logic, the sequel to 100 Days of Logic here at Carneades.org. Today we're continuing with the final 10 days of logic with our special series on the ethics of belief. Today we'll be looking at the will to believe, William James's famous paper responding to William Clifford's paper, The Ethics of Belief. These short series, this 2-video series, is talking about the marriage of Deontic and Doxastic logics using this famous debate between William Clifford and William James. So, in his famous response to William Clifford's paper, The Ethics of Belief, William James claims that there are situations where we can believe on insufficient evidence. In this video, I will present James's argument and, as a good skeptic, offer sufficient objections to completely destroy it. Before we go on, I would like to say that if you don't understand Clifford's paper, it might be a good idea to either check out that paper or check out my video on it preceding this in the series. Both Clifford's paper and James's paper are pretty short, and they're not that difficult to read and get through. But if you want some commentary on them, you want a bit more explanation of them, and of course, as we're going to at the end of this video, some objections to them, stay with me and let's keep going. So, according to James, there are certain situations where we can believe things even with insufficient evidence. These situations must fit certain criteria. They must be situations that cannot be decided on intellectual grounds, have 2 live options, are forced, and are momentous. What does all that mean? Well, to understand exactly what James means, we of course must first come to grips with the kind of meanings of these 4 different criteria. So let's take a look. Cannot be decided on intellectual grounds. What does that mean? Basically, James is saying here that if we can use our reason or our intellectual grounds, our intellectual means at our disposal, our toolkit to decide something, we should. We're not allowed to make irrational decisions if rational ones are in fact available to us. It is only when reason cannot prove nor disprove a hypothesis that we must use our irrational biases to decide it. Underdetermined theories in science might be one example of situations where an answer cannot rationally be chosen. Check out my series, A Theory is Just a Theory, on the problem of underdetermination for more on that. Similarly, you might say that you have no rational way of deciding if you should eat oatmeal or cornflakes in the morning. You must decide on your own opinions, not on some rational system. You must decide upon your passions or your feelings alone, not based on some rational, logical process. 2 live options. So in his paper, James makes a distinction between a live option, one that is a real possibility for the person to whom it is proposed, and a dead one, a possibility that the person would not actually consider, or which would be impossible for them to believe. It might be a live option for someone today to believe in the possibility of aliens somewhere in the galaxy, but might not be a possibility for those people to believe in wizards or fairies, at least here on Earth. Forced decisions are decisions that you must make. Either you eat your vegetables or you do not, is a forced choice. While either you eat your broccoli or you eat your cauliflower is not. You could just eat neither, and therefore not have to make the choice. A forced decision is one, no matter what you do, you make a decision. And finally, momentous. Now, a lot is going to hinge on exactly how James defines momentous. So James distinguishes between choices that are momentous and choices that are trivial. Momentous choices are irreversible, significant, and unique, while trivial choices are reversible, insignificant, or not unique. Any of those 3 is sufficient to show a choice is trivial, and only all 3 are sufficient to show that a choice is momentous. Examples might include being offered the chance to be part of a space mission. If you say no, you probably can't go back on it. It's pretty significant because it might change your whole life, and it's unique. You're probably not going to be offered that opportunity ever again. Or being proposed to marry someone. For similar reasons, it seems that both of these choices are going to be momentous. According to James, the choice of suspending belief is also a proper choice in some way. that you really choose between believing in God, for example, and suspending belief on God's existence. Therefore, our decisions about belief will be forced so long as what we are comparing is whether we should believe or whether we should lack a particular belief. Not whether we should believe that P is true versus believe that P is not true, because we could easily suspend judgment on P, never have heard of P, not have any beliefs about P. But rather to either believe that P is true or not believe that P is true. When we look at the logic of this, it's going to become more clear. Now, James claims that often we are forced to make these kind of forced, live, momentous decisions without evidence. Consider your beliefs about a friend liking you or a significant other loving you. We are forced to make these choices, not to seem cold and unfriendly, but we cannot completely justify our beliefs about them. Before someone tells you, oh, I really like you as a friend, you might have to assume and take actions based on that assumption that they do like you as a friend. The same might be the case before someone tells you that they love you. You might have to kind of assume that they do love you and act on that suspicion to move farther in the relationship, to even get to the point where they will tell you that they do love you. You can't really justify either of those beliefs, but you probably in most social situations are going to have to form them even without justification. According to James, the decision of whether or not to believe in God fulfills all these conditions. It's live, it's forced, and it's momentous, because belief in God will get you into heaven while disbelief might exclude you. And it cannot be decided by intellectual means. Therefore, according to James, we can believe or not believe based on our irrational passions alone. James is basically going to say that the only reason you're going to pick a lack of belief or a belief is just going to be on kind of your opinions, your want of avoidance of error versus your search for the truth and all of these kind of things. Now, I have another video which goes into much more depth on my objections to William James's pragmatism and his theories of truth. Check out that video if you want a whole set of objections which deal with the basis behind the theory that he's offering here. But for some very specific objections here, we are going to move on and keep going. So as a good skeptic, I find James's claims pervasively and irrevocably flawed. In the second part of this video, we will first assess the claim that belief in God is live, forced, momentous, and cannot be decided by actual means, and then we're going to look at the central claim that there are some beliefs that will fit that set of criteria and make those beliefs morally acceptable. Finally, in the third part of the video, because we are in a series on modal logic, we're going to look at what it means to represent all of these claims logically. Alright, so let's talk about liveness. Is the question of whether or not you believe in God live? This probably depends on who you are, the person. Some theists might be so dogmatic they could never doubt their beliefs, and some atheists, similarly, might be so convinced in their denials that they would never come to have such a belief. Check out my videos on Against the Atheists and some Doubting Atheist dogma for more information on that. If someone were so dogmatic that they were unable to doubt their own convictions, it seems that they shouldn't be entitled to believe them. Simply because I cannot doubt that killing all of a particular ethnic group is right doesn't mean that I'm morally justified in believing that statement. Basically what I'm saying here is it seems that if we were to allow any unjustified beliefs, they would need to be those kind of beliefs that if we were to get evidence that were to justify the opposite choice, the opposite belief, then that person would be open to change. It seems that if the opposite belief is not live, if some other option is not live to us, we are being unethical even if we don't have a rational system to do it. So if no evidence would ever make someone doubt their belief in God, it seems that their belief is just as immoral as someone who believed in the face of contrary evidence. So objection 1. Disbelief is not a live option for many theists. And therefore, since they would believe, even if the subject were able to be decided intellectually, they should not be able to help themselves to this irrational belief. Note that this is not an objection for the entirety of James's argument, merely an objection to a very specific subset of people that might use this argument. However, it does seem to me that there are a lot of people who are real theists who there is no piece of evidence that would make them doubt their faith. So, for those people, this seems quite important. Let's look at the forced criterion now. The question now is whether belief in God is forced. If our choices are either have a belief in God or have the belief that God does not exist, then clearly this choice is not forced. Check out my video on the difference between atheists and agnostics to talk a little bit more about that. We can simply, of course, suspend belief. Neither have the belief that God exists, nor have the belief that God does not exist. However, James does phrase the choice as whether we have a belief in God or we lack such a belief. It may seem at this point that the choice is forced. And it's important to realize that this is how James is phrasing the distinction, as we have a belief in God or we lack the belief in God, not we have the belief that God does not exist, because that's going to be very influential for a later characteristic. But for now, let's see if even this way of framing it leaves our choice as forced. Remember, upon remembering the other modal logic that we studied in this large overarching series, temporal logic, it's clear that this should be incorrect. Even if we admit that in a particular moment one is forced to either believe in God or not, it does not preclude one believing in God one moment and doubting him the next, as people often do. There are many evidences and anecdotes of people that have converted to believing in God, who've converted away from believing in God, who've converted from one God to another. So it seems that people can change their beliefs. It seems that only within one instant of time is this choice forced, but across the entirety of one's life, it isn't. And we're going to talk more about this when we come to the idea of this choice being momentous. Therefore, this choice seems importantly less forced than the moment of someone asking to marry you, as such an opportunity may never come again. Whereas you will always be able to change your mind about belief in God. You may be forced in any one moment, but you're never forced on the whole, as the situation might be of someone asking to marry you. You're not temporally forced. Furthermore, it completely discounts models of belief that allow for degrees of belief, such as Bayesian epistemology. Check out my series on Bayesian epistemology for more on that. It seems that when it comes to beliefs about gods, people would be much more likely to commit to only a certain degree of belief, as opposed to being a completely unequivocal belief. Many, both atheists and theists, would not be 100% one way or 100% the other way on the existence of God. And it seems that for the other option to be live, it is impossible to have certain belief in something, since once you have a certain belief, it would be irrational to change it, as we saw in our series on Bayesian epistemology. You are actually irrational if you ever change a certain belief. Note that this is going to cause a problem with our first objection. So we said that if one of the options is not live, it doesn't seem that we can allow someone to morally pick one of the options irrationally over another. But it seems that if at least one of the options is not live, then you're going to be in that situation of certain belief and never be able to change it. But if you have kind of that in-between uncertain belief, that Bayesian belief, 99% one way or the other, then it seems that the choice isn't forced because you have so many different options. You don't have just the option to believe or not believe. You have the option to believe at any degree you want. Objection 2. Belief in God is not forced, since you can change your mind on the subject at any time. It is importantly different from opportunities that you will never get back. And objection 3. If a belief is live, it cannot be certain. See the problem of dogmatism. If it is not certain, it must have a degree of belief assigned to it. if it can have a degree of belief assigned to it, there are more options than just believing or not. If you can have more options than just believing or not, then the option does not seem to be forced. Hopefully, those two things make sense. If they don't, I highly encourage you watch my series on Bayesian epistemology to get a better sense of what a model of epistemology which has degrees of belief looks like. Now, on to our next criterion, momentous. So James uses the idea of Pascal's wager to try to convince his audience that there is a real and important benefit to believing in God. According to James, since we have some real tangible good that we could gain or lose from it, he claims that it is momentous. Note, James is not using Pascal's wager in the same way that Pascal does to say that simply based on these probabilities we should believe in God. James is using Pascal's wager to demonstrate to us that our belief is something that can have a significant effect on our good or bad in the future. However, it's important to note that this is not at all how James originally defined momentous. He defines it as a decision which is unique, significant, and irreversible. By appealing to the claim that a great reward may be received if one believes in God and lost if one does not, James may have demonstrated that the choice is significant, but he has done nothing to show that it is unique or irreversible. In fact, it seems that the choice of whether or not to believe in any particular God, James in his paper is arguing for the Christian one, is the antithesis of unique. One has the opportunity to believe in a multitude of gods throughout one's life, all offering various versions of eternal bliss, various significant factors, but it seems that any individual god's claim to a great good is not at all unique. Now, to this, James might respond, as he kind of notes in the paper, that for a Christian, or for us, those gods are not live options. You wouldn't really believe in Allah. You wouldn't really believe in Vishnu, because clearly you're a Westerner, and our only real options are to believe in the Christian God or be an agnostic. Now, to this, I would respond that a lot of people, often from a Western world or from a very Christian world, do convert to Islam or another religion, Buddhism. To this, I would respond that they might not be live in the sense of direct doxastic voluntarism. I might not, without knowing anything about another religion, without knowing anything about another God, not be able to convince myself just by the power of my will alone to believe in them. But it does not seem to me to be in any way likely that you could not come to believe in these gods through indirect doxastic voluntarism. It seems that only a very close-minded person would be one who could not, if they so chose, come to believe in such a god through indirect doxastic voluntaristic means. Basically, living in that society, following the rituals of the religion, honestly wanting to believe. It seems that were someone to put themselves in those situations, they could come to have that belief. Basically, faking it until they make it, as Pascal said. So, through all of this, it seems that our choice of God is not unique. There's plenty of gods out there. And so the choice of whether we should believe in God or not is not momentous. And furthermore, it seems that belief is far from irreversible. In fact, it seems to be, once again, the absolute opposite of irreversible. As far as choices that we can make, belief seems to be the biggest choice that we can reverse, and most commonly is reversed. As noted when discussing the forced nature of belief in God, one can easily, and in fact daily, change whether or not they believe in God. If someone's going through something of a crisis of faith, they may believe in God one day, not believe the next, believe in God one day, not believe the next. It seems that it can be not only reversed once, but reversed a multitude of times. Belief, not only in God, but in anything, seems to be the opposite of reversible. We change our minds on a daily basis. Now, perhaps James would respond to this by saying that it is your final state of being, right before you die, that matters, or a collection of the total states of being of your life. If so, then he's only made a case for the irrational belief in God in the final moments of your life, as at that moment alone is the decision momentous. At all other times, it would be better to suspend judgment, because at all other times, the decision is reversible. Finally, it seems that if something can become significant because there is a minute possibility that an intangible deity values it, then all actions become significant. Because there are an infinite number of possible intangible deities that could value and therefore reward anything. Imagine a deity that just gives a huge amount of reward to anyone that has oatmeal for breakfast every morning. Or gives more reward the more times you have oatmeal for breakfast in the morning. It seems that based on this, we can construct all these possible worlds where there is some deity that makes seemingly insignificant choices be significant. And therefore, if the only support we have for our choice of should we believe in God or not being significant is that kind of Pascal's wager, small, tiny possibility that there could be some deity who really values that and wants to give us a reward, then everything we do, any possible choice we make, becomes significant. And as soon as everything is significant, the term significant really stops being useful. So, objection 4, belief in a particular God is not momentous because it is not unique. We can choose to believe in a wide variety of gods through indirect doxastic voluntarism. This is like being offered to go to the moon every day, but each time a different country offers to take you to the moon. The choices like that are not momentous. If you know that for every day for the rest of your life you're going to be offered the opportunity to go to the moon, it is no longer unique. And belief in God is not momentous because it is not irreversible. It seems that unlike actions, you can easily change your mind. In fact, most people change their minds many times throughout their lives. Belief can be and often is changed. Perhaps in the final moment of your life, belief in God becomes momentous, but that does not justify it for the rest of your life. And it wouldn't become momentous because it's still not going to be unique. Now, James also claims that a belief in God cannot be decided by intellectual means. Once again, I'm going to take issue. It seems that if we compare belief in God versus belief that no God exists, this is the case. We have no way to prove either statement. However, this hides a subtle equivocation which is going to completely destroy James's argument. Remember how, for our options to be forced, we had to not decide between belief in God and belief in no God, but rather between belief in God and a lack of belief in God. The problem is that for our claim to be not decidable by intellectual means, we need to have the unforced option. We need to claim that we are deciding between belief in God and belief in no God, because neither of those options is intellectually determined. Because right now, what our intellectual means tell us is we don't have enough information. So our intellectual means do determine what we should do. They determine that we should in fact suspend belief. Our intellectual processes, when we can prove neither a proposition nor its negation, our intellectual properties and processes and toolkit tells us what we should do. They tell us that in those cases we should suspend belief. It's on the claimant, it's on someone that puts forward a proposition or puts forward its negation to offer a justification. If we have neither justification, our intellectual toolkit, our basis of reasoning, our rationality tells us we should suspend belief. So the choice between a belief in God and a lack of belief in God is in fact determined by our intellectual means. What is not determined is the choice that James cannot make, which is between a belief in God and a belief in no God, because that choice is no longer forced, and he's gotten rid of that other criterion. To put this simply, since there is no proof either of a God or of no God, our intellectual means require that we suspend judgment. That means that while rationality cannot decide between belief in God and belief in no God, they can and do decide between belief in God and lack of belief in God. Take these three statements to understand. Statement 1, a belief that God exists. Statement 2, Belief that God does not exist. Statement 3, a lack of belief that God exists. Okay? These are 3 positions you can be in. All right? You can believe any one of these 3 statements. Objection 6 goes as follows. The choice that is forced is between 1 and 3. Either you believe that God exists or you lack a belief that God exists. There's no way to get in between that distinction, that disjunction. However, that choice, the choice that is not decidable by intellectual means, is between 1 and 2. Intellectual means can't tell us that God exists, but they can't prove that God doesn't exist either. But the choice between 1 and 2 is not forced. You could lack either belief. And the choice between 1 and 3 is in fact decidable by intellectual means. Because the burden of proof always rests squarely on the shoulders of the claimant, we are determined that what we should do in this case is lack belief that God exists. So, James cannot create a situation where we have both a forced choice and a choice that is not decidable by intellectual means or on intellectual grounds. Now that we've talked about the problems with James's argument dealing with just specifically belief in God, we're going to move on to James's kind of more general claims, which oppose Clifford's more general claims, not necessarily about God, but about belief in general. James says that in situations where belief is momentous, forced, live, and not decidable by intellectual means, it is ethically permissible to believe without justification. Some of these objections are going to be a bit of restatement and kind of extrapolation of our previous objections, but they are going to have some new nuggets and new twists to them. So, objection 7. Belief can never be momentous. It is not merely religious belief, which is reversible, but all belief as well. While your actions in a group of friends or to a lover may not be reversible, actually believing things about them is, as evidenced by the change in the belief experienced by those that go through breakups, for example. Clearly, just because you love someone one moment and don't love them the next, you've probably changed your beliefs about love. So just because we may have moments where it's very important for us to take actions based on our beliefs, it also seems to be the fact that we end up changing those beliefs quite often, and our belief seems reversible. Furthermore, it seems that through skeptical means, one can bring into doubt all of one's previous beliefs, therefore demonstrating that all beliefs are reversible. Objection 8. There seem to be 2 ways to read the statement cannot be decided on intellectual grounds. Either, based on the evidence and research that we have, it cannot be decided, or, in principle, it can never be decided. The problem is that the first seems insufficient. If something can one day be proved one way or the other, why not wait to believe? If our cannot be decided on intellectual grounds is simply, for the moment it can't be decided on intellectual grounds, but if we thought about it a little bit more, worked on it a little bit more, maybe we could figure it out one day, then why would you not wait to believe? Why would you not want to suspend judgment? However, the second can't really do any better, for how can we ever know if a claim is going to be merely temporarily undecided or in principle undecidable? Neither, it seems, is going to be sufficient to support James's claims. Now, objection 9. James claims that in order to leave an option open or to suspend judgment is just as much of a decision as to pick one option or the other. However, it seems that such a decision is not going to have the same detrimental effects of forming belief without justification. If the ship owner had a suspended judgment on whether or not the ship was in good shape, the sensible action to take would be to get it checked out. If the ship owner, instead of having formed one belief, or even formed the other belief of the ship is not in a good state, had a suspended judgment and said, I need more information before I form a belief on this, then the ship owner could have prevented the tragedy. Since further investigation, as opposed to unjustified action, is the logical result of a lack of belief, it does not have the same negative effects that Clifford warned of. as that belief in something does. It may be a choice, but it doesn't seem to me to be as dangerous. Now, James might respond to this objection by saying that the danger lies in when you die, whether or not you believed will be at stake. But it seems to me there is a deeper moral question around why you believe. It seems that there could be an argument to say that a God that saw someone come up to heaven and they believed only for the purpose of personal gain, once again, a la Pascal, as opposed to someone that believed because they had rational reasons and justification for their belief in God. It seems that the latter person should get much more of a reward than the former. And it seems that someone that believed for just the sake of believing would be, if not punished, at least more morally farther down the train than someone that believed for the right reasons and with justification. And finally, objection 10. Whenever something is not decidable on intellectual grounds, it is intellectual grounds for suspending belief. This doesn't just apply to belief in God, it applies everywhere. Therefore, if suspending belief is an option, either there is sufficient intellectual grounds for taking another option, or the lack of sufficient grounds for another option is the sufficient grounds for suspending belief. So, there will never be a situation where you lack sufficient intellectual grounds between the choice of believing in something and suspending belief. Because if you lack sufficient intellectual grounds, your lack of intellectual grounds provide you reason to suspend belief. And if you have intellectual grounds, then of course you don't have any lack of intellectual grounds. Hopefully that makes sense. If not, check out the last objection from the specifically religious-focused one. This is really just a more generalized version of that. Finally, in order to keep with the modal logic theme, we're going to offer translations of some of these statements into Deontic and Doxastic logic. All right. Where S is a subject, C is a choice, B is a belief. Our relation BW is between X, a choice, and a set of options for that choice, Y1, Y2, and so on, which will represent an exhaustive list of the possibilities for that choice. LSX is a predicate which says that a particular option X is live for subject S. MSX is a predicate which says that a choice X is momentous for subject S. And IGX is a predicate which states that a choice X cannot be decided on intellectual grounds. We might have the following statement, which says, for all subjects S, all choices C, and all beliefs B, if C is a choice between believing that B and S not believing that B. Note the difference between not believing that B and believing that not B. The negation is outside that belief quantifier as opposed to inside it. Important distinction. And both choices are live for S, and choice C is momentous, and C cannot be decided on intellectual grounds. Then it is optional for S to believe that B. Hopefully that makes sense. And if it's optional for S to believe that B, it's also permissible for S to believe that not B. Or rather, S to not believe that B. Now, that was just kind of one of these statements of the central idea of James's paper. Let's go through some of the definitions, where MSC is C is momentous for S, UQSC is C is unique for S, RSC is C is reversible for S, SGSC is C is significant for S. We have 4, all choices C in all subjects S. C is momentous for S means that is identical to C is unique, irreversible, and significant for S. Definition of live. James does not give the definition of these in these certain terms, but it seems to me, just to kind of expand our understandings of logic and loop in our third modal logic, that we could use temporal branching logic to offer what seems to me a charitable definition of liveness, where LSX is, it is an option for that X is live for subject S. We could have the following. For all beliefs B and all subjects S, belief in B is live for S means that there is some instant in some possible future where S believes that B. If you're confused by that kind of black diamond note, it's not a lethic modal possibility. It is branching temporal logic possibility. Check out my series on Alchemist branching time, or my 2 videos on it at the end of temporal logic, rather. Now, for a definition of intellectual grounds, as we noted in Objection 8, the definition of being able to be decided on intellectual grounds is ambiguous between 2 different interpretations of the definition. Here is the interpretation where something can only be not decidable on intellectual grounds if nothing will ever decide it. So, in principle, not decidable. Take Bn as a set of beliefs. So we have for all choices C being decidable on intellectual grounds means that there exists a set of beliefs Bn such that the members of Bn are an exhaustive list of the possible choices for C, and there exists some reason R and some belief B such that B is a member of Bn and R is sufficient justification for B. Hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't, check out more on Doxastic logic for the justification stuff, and hopefully we'll do some stuff on set theory at some point to explain that kind of sideways, curvy E that represents is a member of. Now, that's only one of our 2 interpretations. Here's the interpretation which claims that for something to not be decidable on intellectual grounds, it means that no one must have some reason to prefer one over another, or a sufficient reason to prefer one over another. Basically, for all choices C, being decidable on intellectual grounds means that there exists a set of beliefs Bn such that the members of Bn are exhausted list of the possible choices for C, and there exists some reason R, some belief B, and some subject S such that S knows R and B is a member of Bn, and R is sufficient justification for believing that B. Hopefully that all makes sense. Once again, check out the series on Doxastic, epistemic, and justification logic for more information on what's going on there. Now, a final piece in order to fully use and hopefully understand some of our Doxastic and Deontic tools, we're going to outline the process for at least writing out Objection 7. So, if we wanted to provide the argument for our 7th objection, here's how we might do it. Note that the temporal predicates should be restricted to the lifetime of X. For challenge, try to prove the conclusion and use this conclusion then to contradict James's big claim in his argument that we had earlier. So, we have premise 1. If someone believes that P, then there is some future timeline where they stop believing that P. Not necessarily in this future, but there's some possible future where they won't believe that P anymore. And note, like we said, this is only within the lifetime of S, because clearly if S dies, then probably not going to believe anything anymore. If a choice is between believing some proposition and not, then that choice is reversible if and only if believing P means that there is some future timeline where F stops believing that P. And your job is to prove this conclusion. All choices between believing and not believing some proposition are reversible. All right? Hopefully, you can do it. Give it a try. I haven't done all the steps out myself. I would highly encourage someone to do that and post it in the comments below. I'll give you lots of kudos if you do. It's an interesting puzzle, in fact, incorporating a wide variety of our different tools that we've learned about doxastic logic, but also about predicate calculus and all of that. Overall, while James may give adequate criterion for when we can act without adequate justification, it seems that belief will inherently never fulfill his criteria, since it cannot be unique, irreversible, or not intellectually determined, at least in between suspending belief and having some belief. Up next, we're going to move on to our final pairing, solving the paradox of dogmatism with temporal and epistemic logic. To prep yourself for this, you can watch my video on the paradox of dogmatism. And with that, we have only just a few more videos in our 3 months of modal logic. Watch this video and more here at Carneades.org, and stay skeptical, everybody.